Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming so numerous, and hi to the overflow crowd on the other hand there. This evening, I'm trying to really give you an overview or something that is fascinating that we didn't see coming in science, actually. That is opening so many other opportunities to understand why sometimes we stay healthy and why sometimes we do not, despite that we have the same kind of lifestyle. And as Ken, told you, I'm a pediatric gastroenterologist by training, and in my humble opinion, all the world's revolving around the guts. The rest is just stuff that is there for whatever other reason. So, the discussions tonight is going to be mainly on how this recipe that leads to autoimmunity, because I want to give this as an example, but you can take autoimmunity and take any kind of inflammatory disease. And when I say inflammatory, I mean from infectious diseases to cancer to Alzheimer's disease, you name it, because the toy really plays the game the same way. The recipe, the ingredients, the recipe, they change, but pretty much the same story. And again, our classical view of how this disease materialized was, okay, you're genetically predisposed, so the genes, there is something in the environment that is the instigator, and the two together will lead to the clinical outcome. Now, we realize that this is much more complicated now. There is much more to say. There are many more, factors at play, and we're going to discuss some of them. Of course, we will talk about a little bit of genetics. We will talk about the environmental factors. Again, being a gastroenterologist, we're going to talk a lot about this stuff here, the guts. I mean, can you appreciate the beauty? This is the way the guts looks like. I know it doesn't say too much to you, but I really, really love it. We're going to definitely, as Ken was mentioning, talk a lot about, this, ecosystem, this parallel civilization that is absolutely amazing. There are these bacteria or microbes that live with us from birth to death, and how this really pin out in a clinical outcome. Now, to do that right, I need really to start with the definition of what is the gastrointestinal tract. And it seems to be silly and semantic as an introduction here, but truly, there is a lot of debate, even among scholars, what this gut system is all about. Again, in a simplistic way in the past, we thought, okay, this is a long tube. You put food on the top, poop comes in the bottom, and something magic happens in between, and that's it. Well, it's much more than that. We now realize that this is much more complex. Organ, it does many other things. For example, somebody will call this the second brain. Personally, I believe this is the first brain. It will shock you to learn there are many more nervous systems in the gut than in the brain itself. It's the most sophisticated immune system, immune system we have in our body. It makes the large number of, ornaments, and I can go on and on and on. So, long story short, we still do not have an agreement what we define as gastrointestinal system. So, I took the prerogative freedom to decide to use a quote from one of my students. Second grader, because I teach second grade as well. So forget about the spelling. The intestine is a long tube with a clean open on the top and a dirty open at the bottom. She encapsulated the quintessential meaning of what the gut is all about. I know that some of you guys are asking, what the heck is this fish? And I asked her, and she told me that's the noise that Dad makes from the dirty end once in a while. And I met the man. But anyhow, with that said, the father of all physicians, many, many, many moons ago, already appreciated the gut is really the crossroad of many elements that affect humankind. So much so that he used to say, all disease begin in the gut. And again, you heard my quotes that I made in 2010. That is the title of this talk, that what happened, the gut does not stay there. As a matter of fact, I want you for 1 second to come with me in this journey. We're not going to the space like these people, they do stuff like, cool stuff. No, we go in another world that we never even conceptualize. It's much closer. Shrink yourself for a moment 1 million times and imagine to start the journey because you've been swallowed and you are in this 20-feet long tube. You are in a company of a gazillions of things in there. Some stuff can be friendly and good for us, i.e. food stuff. Other stuff can be really obnoxious, and they can really make the entire operation, i.e. our body, in major jeopardy. And every day, hundreds of times a day, your guts, without you being aware, has to make this decision. Who is friend and can stay, and who is foe that I really need to fight so that I will not put in danger the entire situation here. Hundreds and hundreds of times. And this is a very large interface that we have with the environment. The rest of the interface, the skin, the lungs, the general urinary tract, they don't have to do that kind of job. It's very monotone. Everything that is in there is not supposed to be there, and either needs to be kept out at all costs, skin, 7 layers, or the lungs is at only the air. The rest, I don't want anything. If the immune system of the gut, that is the one that surveys friends and foes, will be monotone like in the lung, imagine the disaster of that decision. So it is unbelievable, the fact that we stay healthy despite the many wrong calls that eventually our guts can make, because again, this decision needs to be made in real time all the time. What really amazed me is that only a few times we make a mistake. The classical mistake is, how we handle stuff in our guts that eventually is supposed to be friendly with us and turns not. What I show you here is a cross-section of a gut. It happened to be in a mouse, but it would be just our gut. Imagine now this is the hole, the tube, where all the stuff goes through, okay? And this is all color-coded. This is a special stain in the gut because I have to express you some parallel, so I make sure that I will not put you asleep in the next 20 seconds because this is a kind of complicated kind of biology, but I want to make sure that we are on the same wavelength. The entire length of the gut is covered by a single layer of cells. That's it. That's the only thing that defends us from the lost battle. Imagine this as a fortress. Our body is the fortress or medieval, city or castle. You have to have a fortification. You have to have a wall that will protect the fortress. That is our wall. This single layer of red cells is the one that is the fortress that defends against these enemies, this wealth of stuff that comes into the gut. As any fortress, into the fortress, we have an army of soldiers that are watching constantly who is out there and eventually would defend us if and when stuff goes wrong, i.e. we're in presence of the enemy, though we have to deploy weapons. These are called immune cells. These are the soldiers that we use to fight these enemies all the time, but they also are the one that decide who is friend and should be left alone, that technically we call tolerance, and who is an enemy that needs to be fought, and that will be the immune response. And when you fight and you shoot weapons, you create collateral damage that we call inflammation. Are you guys still with me? Yes. The overflow people, are you still with me? They're drinking wine by now. Who knows what the heck they're doing? So, and like all army, we have, different groups. So there is, the army, there is the navy, there is the air force, and so on and so forth. The same story applies to the cells. So in green, for example, you have a subgroup of immune cells that we call intestinal dendritic cells. These are the first one that will come over there and will figure out, are you a friend or foe? Should I just start to be worried and put my weapons together or not? And they do that by even put out periscopes into the lumen to seek who is in there. Is that cool or what? If they realize that there is something that is potentially dangerous, They will communicate to other series of cells. They're called the B cells, the one in blue. They are the ones that create the special weapons. They are customized against special enemies that we call antibodies. These are the ones that we build when we are fighting and facing a potential danger of, enemy. And then, even more specialized, are decided cells in white T cells that they do yet another things. They produce chemicals to make that environment extremely unfriendly, particularly to bacteria. So they make it too hot, too chemically unfriendly, so the bacteria will not grow in that kind of environment. All this to say, and my biology lesson is over, is that just looking at an anatomical arrangement, it speaks volumes what the gut is really all about other than digest and absorb food stuff. It does a lot of other stuff there. So how we balance this yin and yang between tolerance, I seek what is out there, is a friend, I don't do anything about this, or immune response, I know that this can be dangerous, so I will better prepare for a war and put my weapons together. Now we understand much more than we had before, and the recipe, i.e. genes plus environment, it became much more complex than that. Most definitely you need the genes. You need to be genetically predisposed to develop a disease, for sure. Definitely you need to have an environmental trigger, something that is mismanaged by the immune system because of the genetic predisposition. Again, the immune system is there to defend us, but when genetically speaking, we are skewed or predisposed for diseases like autoimmune diseases, they point the weapon rather than against the enemy so that you can get rid of it, against your own body. And depending on the target, if it's the brain, you can develop multiple sclerosis. If it's the pancreas, you can develop diabetes. If you're a joint, you develop rheumatoid arthritis. The guts, you develop celiac disease, and so on and so forth. That is the classical, old-fashioned way to see story. When I say classical old, I mean 3 years old. That's it. Because now we realize that there's something else. Ken was alluding to leaky gut. I hate that terminology. And the reason why, because this has been vilified, because it's been used and abused, that anything that goes wrong is because of leaky gut. Was the interim term of the elections not the way that you liked? It was the leaky gut. Today was 20 degrees here, and so the swim trunks that I brought are useless, leaky gut. And I can go on and on and on. There is a lot of fantasy about this leaky gut, but very few facts. And the few facts that we know will be shared with you tonight. It suffices to say, though, that these two worlds, the genes that live within the fortress and these instigators that live outside the fortress, they need to physically interact in order to have an immune response that can create that collateral damage that we call inflammation. And this can happen only if we lose the capability to maintain these enemies at bay, and I will tell you in a moment how. Then there is, the immune response. By definition, the soldiers, they need to do something wrong to get diseases that can harm us. So there is definitely an immune component. I am totally biased, toward these guys here, the microbiome. What a fascinating world. We didn't know anything about this. Nothing. Until the recent past. And now we have an explosion of knowledge that, again, is telling us that this ecosystem, this parallel civilization that live with us, has a tremendously important role to decide what's going to happen to us. And I will tell you in a moment why. And finally, all these 5 ingredients will eventually lead to the clinical outcome. But I want to, mainly focus on this gut permeability and how this eventually leads to any kind of disease in humankind. So I told you there are a lot of fantasies, very few facts about the leaky gut. Let me tell you the interesting fact about this. I told you already that it's a single-layer cells. Physiologists until the mid-70s will consider this, wall of the fortress as a sort of floor in which each cell was a tile, and in between cells, everything was cemented. There was grouts of cement. Or again, if you think the wall of the fortress, you have, the block and stones, and everything was sealed in between. So there was absolutely no way that stuff in between cells can go. And the communication between the external world and our body will happen only if you can cross through, this, gate entry that were the cells. I told you already that the gut is extremely long, 20 feet long, but it is not smooth, has valleys and hills. If you stretch the gut of an adult on the floor, you cover double tennis court, 3,000 square feet. I know, wow. So who said wow? Show it by hand. Now you ladies are with me. The gut is so wow. When I teach to my students, there is in medical school now that we teach by systems. And, when the gastroenterologist has to teach about the gastrointestinal tract, we always say, it's just dirty, smelly stuff. It's not a noble, organ. And I always ask the same things, and I'm going to ask you guys. In your opinion, what is the most influential organ in your body? Some people would say the brain, some people would say the heart, some people would say the lung, and so on and so forth. Well, let's do an experiment here. How many of you guys ever had a stroke in your life? One. How many people have ever had a heart attack in your life? None. How many people had pneumonia in your life? Good. How many people have ever had a diarrheal episode in your life? Did I make my point? Did I make my point? Good. Science can be very boring. Do not be deceived by the fact that I'm making jokes. It's because I want you with me all the way to the 2 hours and 55 minutes that I'm going to talk tonight. In the where is Ken? Ken just falls on the floor. That's right, this is a street. All right, so in the mid-70s, a Japanese group came up with an unbelievable revelation. They said, guys, there is no grout in between these, tiles. There is no cement in between these blocks. There are doors, almost always closed, but there are doors that they call tie junctions, meaning that there is a way that eventually this can be opened, because if you have doors rather than walls, it means that you have the need once in a while to open these doors. It's going back to the similarity of the fortress. You have the drawbridge that needs to come down, because sometimes you have to bring food in, you have to bring friends in, but once you've done that, you want this drawbridge to close because you want to be protected against these enemies. You don't want this down all the time, okay? And for almost 10, 15 years, there was a flourish science with seminal discoveries to tell us how these tie junctions, these doors are made. But one element that was missing in terms of the information was, what is the key? Who opens and closes these doors? And by serendipity, that, by the way, is my favorite English word, you have probably realized by my accent now that I'm not native of Pensacola, I'm from Kentucky. But the English vocabulary is rather unsophisticated. It's only have, 600,000-700,000 words, that's it. The Italian one, where I'm coming from, is almost 2 million words. So that's the reason why when we have to say something, we go on and on and on, and we use our hands, because we got to use whatever we have. But one word that I can translate, that Gingy writes, is serendipity. There is this unforeseeable alignment of stars that come at the right time, at the right place, with the right people, and so on and so forth. It was an act of serendipity. I was doing something else that we discovered this molecule that you heard, zonulin, that turns to be so far the only key that we're aware of, that it's going to be many more, that can really make this gates to get open and close, on and off, very short period of time. So what we learn about this molecule, how this works, how they open these doors. Well, there are several triggers from the environment that can make cells to produce these molecules and therefore to make the intestine leakier, okay? One of them turns to be, surprise, surprise, this protein gluten that is the key protein of many grains like wheat, barley, and rye that you heard. How many of you guys are gluten-free? Wow. Okay. How many of you guys have celiac disease? Okay, so a much smaller in the group. But, for the people that are gluten-free, they know what's going on. For the people that are not gluten-free, what's wrong with you guys? Anyhow, interestingly enough, without going too much in details, and again, these are very few factual information about this gluten business, because now it seems that everybody go gluten-free, that if you're not gluten-free, you're a wacko. Particularly, in California, 95% of the people are gluten-free. I mean, so it's got to be good. We did not evolve to eat this protein. As a matter of fact, for the 2.5 million years of evolution, humankind, we've been gluten-free for 99.9%. Gluten came only 10,000 years ago, a fraction of a second in human evolution, when our ancestors dramatically changed their lifestyle from nomadic, moving around, chasing food by migration of animals to and seasonal crops, to settlers, and that's when they domesticated crops and animals, and that's when they start to play with grains, and that's how they develop grain containing gluten. And from there, as the young crowd would say, it went viral. It went just all the way. But again, we are not apt to eat this molecule because gluten, like any other protein, can be compared to a sort of pearl necklace. In order to make use of it, you need to digest it, meaning that you have to break the necklace in pieces and then pull this pearl that we call amino acids one at a time, because only the pearl, i.e. amino acids, can be brought in the fortress. If you have these pieces that are not digested, they cannot come through. Not only that, but this, of all the stuff that surrounds us, the immune system perceives enemies, stuff that don't belong to us, only for proteins. No fat, no sugars are the proteins that instigate the immune response that can make you sick. So imagine if you have a molecule like this, cannot be completely digested, and somehow these pieces will make the journey into the fortress. Now, some of the fragments that cannot be digested are color-coded here. These two blue guys here, they communicate with the fortress and say, please, release zonulin. Open that drawbridge because I need to come in. That's what this molecule does. And the more we study this molecule, the more we realize that mistakenly, because we didn't evolve with this is perceived as a component of microorganism. It's like that the immune system, when they see this molecule, perceived to be under attack or infection. And we deployed exactly the same kind of weaponry, including the release of zonulin, that we will deploy if we're under attack with the enemy. Now, for that reason, many people make the leap of faith. If that's the case, everybody needs to go gluten-free, otherwise our species will be extinct. Well, let me clarify a couple of things. First, if you sit over here, and you're not jumping from one tree to another like our ancestors chimpanzees, and you do, woo, it's because of this molecule. Because before agriculture, our time was spent 95% for food procurement and 5% for reproduction. I think that the ratio was unbalanced, but that's okay. Imagine when we can predict the availability of food by developing agriculture. That 95% decreased to 5%. The rest was unleash our creativity. And that's how we built the Colosseum, the pyramids, and then a place like this, with the kids that we visit today in the lab doing unbelievable stuff. Because of agriculture, because of this molecule. So again, there is some good in here. But one thing that we have to keep in mind, again, that we fight with this molecule all the time. Because again, we perceive it like a bacterium. But we fight with bacteria all the time. Very rarely we lose this battle and we develop infections. By the same token, we fight with this molecule all the time. Very rarely we lose the battle, and these are the people that have celiac disease or other gluten-related disorders. But all this to say that this molecule, like some bacteria, because bacteria do the same, can instruct these cells to release zonulin and open this drawbridge. I can skip this, but I want to show it to you because I spent 3 months and $500 to do that, so I got to show you. It's simply to say that by the time something happens in the lumen here, that will instruct the cell to release the zonulin, to the time in which this gate that are closed here, open here, will happen, it takes only 20 minutes. That's it. And it takes also the same short period of time to go back and close the entire deal once the stimulus is gone. The most fascinating part of this story, and again, this is to emphasize again that the gut is not like Las Vegas, it's genetics. The gene that encoded this molecule is sitting on this teeny tiny chromosome that is chromosome 16. Only 3% of the human genome, roughly 1,300 genes are sitting here. But it's packed with genes that have been associated to some important disease of humankind. The genes of 3 major classes of disease, autoimmune diseases, cancer, and disease of the nervous system are sitting here. For example, genes for inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's disease are sitting here. Lupus, type 1, rheumatoid arthritis, many genes involving cancer like breast cancer and lymphoma and prostate cancer are sitting here, and disease of the nervous system like Lou Gehrig disease, leukodystrophy, MS, and autism genes are sitting on chromosome 16. When the gene for zonulin was cloned only 3 years ago, 2011, a series of scientists worldwide looked at this gene to see if it was linked to any disease other than celiac disease. That was the only one that we discovered to be linked, and sure enough, the same 3 categories showed up. So autoimmune diseases like celiac disease, Crohn's, rheumatoid arthritis, type 1 diabetes, cancer, particularly brain cancer and ovarian cancer associated with this. Pancreatic cancer is a big deal associated with that. And finally, MS and schizophrenia seems to have this gene involved. Meaning that this gene, i.e. the capability to bring down this drawbridge that we thought that was just in the gut, but the same system is really existing in many other districts in our body, including the blood-brain barrier that distributes, the trafficking between the bloodstream and the brain are regulated by this molecule. And as typically happens, when you move from physiology, bridge down, bridge up in 20 minutes, to pathology, got down and stuck down for hours and hours, you spill from physiology, i.e. to stay healthy, to pathology, to develop disease. Are you guys still with me? Is still on board? Because if you're not, we start all over again. No. Now, many researchers start to try to understand what is the impaired barrier function, or leaky gut, whatever you want to call it, is associated to. Many more diseases, just autoimmune diseases. And here, I just give you an example of, any kind of tissue organ that can be involved in this loss of barrier function. So I told you already about MS, but look at stroke, schizophrenia, asthma, COPD, RSDD, dilated cardiomyopathy. You can read it. In other words, there are a lot of conditions in which this inappropriate adjuvant trafficking seems to be involved in the genesis of these diseases. Now, I'm going to give you just a couple examples that we really dig in much deep, details. 2 autoimmune diseases, celiac disease and type 1 diabetes. And we have a way to measure this molecule, zonulin, in the blood. And interestingly enough, both in people with celiac disease and type 1 diabetes, the amount of this molecule produced is much higher than normal people. Okay? What is also interesting that a subgroup of their relatives, they are healthy. These are mom, dad, brother, sister that do not have the disease. They also have an increased permeability of the gut. And that posed the question, is this an epiphenomenon? In other words, something that has nothing to do with the reason why these people, they got sick, so that even people that are not sick, they have it. Or it's a cause-effect relationship, i.e. because you have a leaky gut, because you produce too much zonulin, because there are much more junk coming from the outside, inside, now you instigate the immune system to develop this collateral damage that will harm your own body. And nobody knew, because there was no such a thing in terms of to link mechanistically these two things until the recent past. So that allowed us to a mind-blowing out-of-the-box thinking hypothesis. If the recipe for autoimmunity, hypothetically, called for a third ingredient, so you got to have the genes, you have to have the environmental trigger that is mismanaged by the immune system, but also you have to have a loss of barrier function, i.e. these drawbridges are stuck down, so the flux of these enemies comes this all the time. If it's an integral part and not an epiphenomenon of the genesis of this disease, any of the 3 ingredients in the recipe that will be taken out should do the trick. Taking the genes out, forget it. There are too many. We don't know all of them. If they are there, evolutionarily speaking, not being eliminated means that they are important for other functions. We can't do that. And eliminating the environmental trigger that cause autoimmunity is a luxury that we have only for celiac disease. Because yes, gluten is the only known instigator of autoimmunity in an autoimmune disease as celiac disease. We don't know why people come down with MS or with diabetes or rheumatoid arthritis. We don't know what is the instigator. What we do know for celiac disease. So we can remove that for the vast majority of autoimmune disease. But we know that eventually, at least this is what we want to try, if we leave the genetics behind, if we don't touch the environmental trigger, while we stop this uncontrolled passage of these enemies in the wall, in the city of the fortress, because of the stuck down drawbridges, can we fix the problem that way? And that's what we try to do by developing an inhibitor of this molecule. Now imagine, again, zonulin as a key that needs to be put in the hole where you have to open a door. And imagine now that you have wax that you can put on the hole. So by the time that the key comes, can't just get in there, therefore can't open the door anymore. And will keep this door closed. So that was the concept that was developed as a proof of concept. Can we stop the traffic of stuff from outside the world inside so we can stop autoimmunity? To do that, we did some studies in animals first and then in humans. For animals, we decided to focus on an animal model of type 1 diabetes, mainly because we don't have an animal model of celiac disease, but also because it's tightly controlled, and these animal models really resemble very, very closely what happened in people with type 1 diabetes. So what we did was to follow these animals. This is a rat model that behaves exactly like in humans. 30 days is the time in which they introduce solid food in their diet. So they are breastfed until 30 days of age, after which we introduce the chow. As soon as we introduce baby food, what happened in this magenta line is their intestines start to leak. And 2 weeks after that you introduce baby food, it goes over the normal threshold of leakness, and then that means that the intestine lost its barrier function. Now stuff comes in all the time. So meaning that this line means the drawbridge is down and not coming up anymore. 2 weeks after this happened, they start to produce the autoantibodies that we know that go after the cells that produce insulin in the pancreas. Still not diabetes, because in blue, you see the line that emphasized the glucose level of this animal that was normal. It's only 2 weeks after that these antibodies will appear that the glucose level go up and go over the threshold, and they develop, diabetes. Only if you give insulin, these animals will survive, like humans. Otherwise, they will die. If you give them drinking water, these animals, this zonulin inhibitor, before they start winning with, the solid food, no leakness to the gut, no autoantibodies produced, no diabetes. This was the first time that mechanistically we can link a leaky gut with the pathogenesis of an autoimmune disease. And it was not just cosmetic. We look into the pancreas. Now, the cells that produce insulin in the pancreas, they are produced in what we call the structures, pancreatic structure that we call islets. Conceptualize the islets as a sort of balloon in which the air that is in the balloon are the cells that produce insulin, what we call beta cells. And the wall of the balloon are the cells that produce another hormone that we call glucagon. And this balance between insulin and glucagon can keep, glucose steady state in the blood. In the animals that were not treated, what happened is like that somebody punched the balloon, so we'll deflate the balloon. So now the air, i.e. insulin-producing cells, are gone, and the balloon is collapsed. And that's what you see here. No air, i.e. insulin-producing cells, and the balloon is collapsed. These are the glucagon-producing cells. The animals that were rescued by the zonulin inhibitor, the air, the beta cells producing insulin is still there, and the balloon was still inflated, as you see here. So that was the nail on a coffin, so to speak, that indeed what this molecule was doing by stopping this trafficking of antigens was preventing autoimmune diseases in these animals. We moved this to clinical setting now in celiac disease. So in other words, can we now, after that we prove the involvement in animals, can we prove this in human beings? And we move to celiac disease as a proof of concept. Why? Because celiac disease is one of a kind. I told you that it's the only autoimmune disease that you can turn on and off at will. You go gluten-free, you turn off the autoimmune process. There's no enemy to fight anymore. An immune system that works in economy will shut down. No weapons used anymore because the enemy is gone. Not because, anything, but you eliminate it with a gluten-free diet. You give gluten back, it will come back again. It will eventually lead to the collateral damage that is characterized celiac disease, i.e. destruction in intestine with all the clinical consequences. This is so easy that I don't have to go into these details, guys. So forget it. I don't even understand myself the freaking stuff in here. But anyhow, the only thing that I want to say is until 5 years ago, of all these chain of events that are number 1 to 10, these yellow dots, the only thing that we knew was one, i.e. you eat gluten, you will get this final destination. The line steps were totally unknown. Now we do. We know that you have to eat gluten, you have to have a leaky gut, stuff has to go through it. These immune cells need to see this molecule and present. These are the famous dendritic cells, the one with the periscope. They need to instruct other cells to mature and eventually get a response. And that the defect is right here. These cells, rather than to clean the mess and say, okay, you are out of my body, I'm going to get rid of you, we start to produce chemicals, cytokine and chemokine, that eventually will lead to the destruction of intestine and characterize autoimmunity. So it means that you can really get in each of these other steps and stop the final destination theoretically. And the idea here was, okay, let's use this molecule, larazodide acetate, that the way that they called for this clinical trial, this inhibited zonulin, and see if we can stop all this chain of events. So now there are people that are leveraging this modulation of this doors, tight junction, for many, many diseases, including, again, autoimmune disease, IBS, and so on and so forth. What's happening so far? Almost 1,000 people took this molecule. It's extremely safe because it works outside of the body. You have to take this before the meal and has to put, its presence like a wax where the key holder for the key is. So you don't have side effects because it comes in your body. And again, I want to go straight to the point. These are people with celiac disease treated. They're doing well. This is a double blind, so the people don't know, the physician doesn't know. What happened is that there was a subgroup that was given gluten only, knowing that they would get sick, and others that were given gluten plus this molecule. The one that got gluten only, there are the yellow bars here, are the ones that got all the symptoms that you will anticipate that you will experience as a celiac if you're exposed to gluten. But if you take gluten plus this molecule, you see little or no symptoms whatsoever, meaning that the immune system didn't see the molecule anymore. Because, why? Because it was kept outside. The door was sealed at this point by this molecule, so the stuff didn't come through. So I'm going to show you a movie, if this is going to work, how this all really works. So stay with me. So these are the guts. Zoom in. These are the villi. Zoom in. These are the microvilli. These are the two neighbor cells. These are the tight junctions. They are close. The stuff stays out. Now something comes in, like gliadin, that will communicate to the cell to release zonulin, as I told you, and this will eventually create a situation in which these doors that are closed, see, nothing comes through, will be now magically open long enough to have all the junk, including gluten, come into our body, and these are the soldiers. That's beyond the wall. They see the enemy, they start to, go nuts, produce these chemicals, and these chemicals will eventually damage the stuff. The larazodide, the wax, see, binds there, now zonulin cannot communicate anymore, so these doors will stay closed, gluten will stay out, and therefore will not harm the individual anymore. So that's pretty much the way that works. Now, I spent a lot of money on this, so I meant to show that movie. I'm going to wrap it up with something that is totally mind-blowing. I didn't see this coming. I really didn't see this coming. The paradigm was, if you have the genes that put you at risk for a disease, it is destiny. That sooner or later you will come down to this. You have the genes for Alzheimer, you will develop Alzheimer. You have the gene for any autoimmune disease, you will develop it. Totally wrong. The fact that you have the genes doesn't mean that you will develop it. If you develop it or not, strongly depends on your lifestyle. Strongly depends on your lifestyle. Why we know that? This is only 50-year span, 1950 to 2000. We experience in developing countries an explosion of autoimmune diseases like MS, Crohn's disease, type 1 diabetes, asthma. The timeline is too short to really blame genetic mutation that takes a generation to occur. So if it's not the genes, it has to be the environment that's changing too fast for us to adapt. During the same timeline, in the industrialized countries, we saw infectious diseases go the opposite way, and that led to the formulation of the hygiene hypothesis. Do you guys know what is the hygiene hypothesis? No. Okay. I don't have the time because I'm short of time. I'm going to give you a very short version. Once upon a time, there was something that we used to call backyard. Backyard? That was the place where kids used to play. It was called backyard. This crowd should remember. My son doesn't know what I'm talking about. That's the place where the people used to play, the kids, not supervised by the parents, so they have the freedom to put, the hands in the dirt, and then in the mouth, and then the dirt, they scratch the butt, then in the dirt, and then in the mouth. That was the way that our immune system was trained against its enemy. Now, there is no such a thing like the backyard. The backyard is the couch. The entertainment is the Xbox or whatever it is. And if you sneeze, actually, if you attempt to sneeze, your parents will come with the sanitizer right away. That's the essence of the hygiene hypothesis. This was also based on the fact that why we see this in industrialized countries, now we didn't see this kind of phenomenon in developing countries where there is not such an hygiene. This hygiene hypothesis has been put in question recently because now people have much better hygiene in some of these countries like Chile, Argentina, North Africa and so on and so forth, yet they don't see this. They will experience this if they move to the United States. So what is going on here? So look at this. This is another astonishing phenomenon. This 1 in 5,000 in 1975, change this because now in 2013, 1 in 68 kids will develop autism. Ratio male-female 4-to-1. That means 1 out of 4 boys is out of commission. What the heck we're doing to the environment to make these kids coming down with autism at such a fast pass rate? What's going on here? And the same, the unforeseeable that's happening with celiac disease, it doubles every 15 years. No matter if you eat gluten, because everybody does, some people were able, in this cohort of people, to eat gluten for 70 years and stay healthy, and all of a sudden they lose tolerance and they develop celiac disease in mid-70s. So what's going on here? Sure, there's a lot of stuff that we're talking about now, the quality of gluten, the quantity of gluten, and so on and so forth. The reality is we don't know. We at the beginning thought, well, these are the problems, breastfeeding, time to gluten introduction, the quantity, and so on and so forth. We just published this less than a month ago, a little bit more than a month ago, in New England Journal of Medicine. 700 kids followed for 10 years. And all the hypotheses went to the toilet, and we flushed the toilet as well. So bottom line, the amount of gluten that you eat is not important. When you introduce gluten, at least, in terms of the timing to introduce gluten is not important. Early important, because if you got too early, it's going to be a problem. But if you delay gluten introduction, because we thought that you can prevent celiac disease, you merely, delay the onset of the disease. Astonishingly surprising, breastfeeding does not protect. That breastfeeding does so many good things, but if you're breastfed, the bottle fed, your destiny is the same. The only thing that made the difference was genetics. There are some genes that you got to have celiac disease that are called HLA genes. One of them is the HLA-DQ2 that seems to be instrumental. You are Josh Mo, 1% chance to develop celiac disease. First degree relatives, 10%. But if you are first degree relatives with 2 copies of these genes, because you got that both from mom and dad, 40%. Almost half. So that's the only thing that counts. So with that in the trash, what else? Well, here we go. Our beloved microbiome. This is, in my humble opinion, what is driving the epidemics of these diseases. Everything starts with nutrition. This ecosystem has to be fed. And if it lives in our guts, what else they eat other than the leftover of what we eat? And the other surprising news that we learn is that this microbiome composition, as I was telling you, you train, is the one that trains our immune system. And this is done in the first 3 years of life, after which the game is over. If you have a good microbiome that is a good trainer and will understand how to communicate with the immune system, how to behave correctly, i.e. to fight against the enemy and protect your body, you stay healthy and you may eventually avoid problems over time. When I say problem, I don't talk about problem in childhood. I talk about Alzheimer when you become 60. Or any other immune disease that will be the consequence of the immune system that doesn't know how to handle stuff. The game is over in the first 3 years of life. If you have an inappropriate maturation of your immune system, together with the genetic predisposition, now you develop the disease. But if you have a genetic predisposition, this has been trained correctly, you're not going to get there. So the lifestyle is tremendously important. Tremendously important. And we eat very differently than we used to. Only 3 generations ago will come to you as a surprise. We didn't have a refrigerator. Most of you guys are of my era. You will remember, you want strawberries, you wait July and August. Strawberries, they come all year round. How's that possible? I never heard about kiwi until I was 40. Didn't know what the heck it was. So the bottom line is that we are much more complex than we believed before, but when the Human Genome Project was completed, we realized that genetically we are extremely rudimental. We are at the bottom of the scale of complexity. Only 25,000 genes. And a fisherman here. Fishermen? 2 fishermen in Pensacola. 4. What the heck are you doing the rest of the day? Anyhow, for you 4 fishermen, the worm that you use to go fishing has 4 times more genes than yourself. 95,000 genes, 25,000 genes. So how we can be the dominating species to be so, and why we are so genetically rudimental? Well, the reason why, because we are the complexity of 2 systems working together. The human genome and this other ecosystem that together generates 100 more genes than we do. I know that this will shock you, but you are made by more microorganisms than your own cells. For each cell in your body, you have 10 microorganisms living on you. It's yucky, but that's the way it is. Just get over it. The reality, we are made by 2 genomes. The human genome, that's fixed. If I have defects because it puts you at risk for celiac disease, Alzheimer, diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, whatever, you can't trade in. And this comes from mom and dad. But the fact that you have that genes doesn't mean that it's destiny that you develop this disease. If you do or do not, depends on this other parallel civilization, the microbiome, much more plastic. They can change over time in the same individual. They change from one individual to another. So it really can change the outcome big time. And again, if you're lucky, it comes from your mother. Because if you inherited the microbiome of your mom, and if microbiome lives in peace with your mom's genes, probably will live in peace with your genes. How do we know that? Because if you're born by C-sections in which you have bad guys and good guys coming together, you have 5 more times risk to develop celiac disease that you're born by vaginal delivery. That's the reality of the story. And the reason why, because the microbiome is totally different. This is mom's oral microbiome in green, right here. In deep red is the microbiome of the vaginal microbiome of mom, and this is the gut microbiome of the kids that are born by vaginal delivery in pink. But if you're born by C-sections, these are the light blue, your microbiome is the skin microbiome of mom that is in deep blue. And that microbiome is not being selected by mom. It's whatever comes to the environment, the hospital, whatever, the operator was in the room, and there can be good guys or bad guys. That's the reality of the story. This is what we learn by looking at the microbiome. All right. So bottom line, I need to wrap it up because, I'm almost over here. The human genome can be considered as a sort of piano with 25,000 notes. Each of one is a gene. And let's say that you need to struck 300 notes to play the song celiac disease, diabetes, Alzheimer, dementia, breast cancer, you name it, okay? If you got this defective piano because you have those 300 notes, the fact that you will eventually play that song or not depends on the piano player. Because if nobody sits at the piano, nobody can play music. And that's the microbiome. And this can change. So you can have different players. So if you're born by vaginal delivery, you don't have infection, you don't take antibiotics, your immune system is trained correctly because you've been fed the right way. You may have Elton John that touched 200 to 300 notes and you don't play the song. Then you got an infection, you go nuts, you go to Cancun and got drunk, you got a surgery or whatever. Now you have Chopin, it's much more virtuoso. He can touch all 300 notes at any age. You can develop the disease. So it is not destiny. The destiny is driven by our lifestyle. How do we know that? Because we can hear the music. When these two worlds, they work together, you produce some molecules, they are metabolites. They are the consequence of pathways. They're activated when these two worlds, they cross-talk. So I now have the ability to read the music. If I see the pop music played, I know that the good microbiome is seated there. As soon as I hear classic music, I know that over the time, I will develop a problem. That's where the future is. That's where we're leading to. Because now from proof of concept, this is becoming reality. We are trying to identify and validate biomarkers that months before would tell me that the wrong microbiome is sitting there and can bring me in the wrong direction that leads to disease. And we need this, because we've done studies, for example, these metabolites in people with celiac disease and type 1 diabetes, they change their profile months before that these kids, they lose tolerance. I'm going to finish up with something else that I also didn't see coming. This leaky gut has to do also with obesity, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and type 2 diabetes. I didn't see this coming. And this is because the rationale is that increased gut permeability seems to be associated with inflammatory tone of the gut, development of obesity, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. And, rapidly, you see the dates here. We talk about 2011 and 12. This is the paper, gut microbiota, intestinal permeability, obesity, and inflammation, liver injury. Intestinal permeability and obese patients are correlated with metabolic syndrome. Nutrition, intestinal permeability, and so on and so forth will make you fat. Zonulin and marker intestinal permeability is increasing associated with obesity associated with insulin resistance. In other words, this loss of trafficking can be part of the story. I don't want you to leave you with the impression that if you fix the leaky gut, you're not fat anymore. Because if you have this kind of attitude, you will stay fat. Okay? I want to finish by saying the best way to predict the future is to create it. This institute is the quintessential of this sentence I would just, they create the future. And they can predict because they are the ones that are in driving seats. The same, we're trying to do this in biology. We want to predict what's going on so that we will be easy prophets because we know what's going to happen. In one day, you will go to your physician, you give the chip of your genome, and while you're sitting there, the physician says, give me a little bit of your poop just for a second. Got back in the lab, they will look at the microbiome. By the time that the visit is finished, these two information will be put in the computer and say, you know what? With this microbiome and your genes, if we don't fix this, you're going to develop type 2 diabetes or whatever. Let me change your microbiome, giving you prebiotics, probiotics, and so on and so forth. So this is the future. I'm going to finish by saying I had a lot of fun tonight because very rarely I can unleash the insanity of what I have in my mind. Because if I had done this in a venue with colleagues, they will really crucify me heads down. But I also have to say the science is a constellation of failure with very, very few successes. We live for those. And I don't do that. I am the orchestrator, the director of orchestra. These are the players. So whatever you heard tonight is really due to the, fearless and constant work of an unbelievable group of people that have the privilege to work with. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We have 6 minutes for questions. The gentleman over there. You got to wait. The rule.
Thank you for a brilliant lecture. I was reading from an author on the gut who agreed with you that the gut is paramount. And he was saying that the most important supplement a person should take to build a better future would be a probiotic. Can you talk more about, is it possible for a probiotic to really help the door stay shut and prevent disease in the future?
I think that the probiotics, they have tremendous potential, but I'm very, very concerned the way that this is happening. If there is something wrong with the bacteria in your guts, what we call technically dysbiosis, can be very different from one individual to another. We're making with probiotics the same mistake that we made when penicillin was discovered. We thought that that was the panacea of resolving any infections. We know now the major mistake that we made by promiscuously use penicillin for any infection. So I think that probiotics will be the way to go, but you cannot just take any probiotics. You have to study first what is wrong in your gut microbiota composition and customize the right probiotic to fix it. Yes, ma'am. What do you think? Rules. Rules. Okay, go for it.
What do you think about yogurt on a daily basis?
I like that because now we're talking about a natural source of probiotics that we've been evolving with, that actually is healthy, is live, and again, it would be part of the regular lifestyle. Again, I don't want you to get out of here and got the 2 gallons of yogurt today. That would not be good because the secret really is very, very simple. Don't look too far, not the paleo diet, because that's not the way they would do it, but how our grandparents used to live. Yeah. That's the way to do it. We know that there are some stuff that we can eliminate. We can rewind the tape, completely. We know, for example, that cars pollute and the cell phones that can give you brain cancer, but we cannot live without cell phones and cars anymore. But we can wisely use them. Same applies with nutrition. Be wise.
Can you tell us how you feel about fermented foods in our diet?
Well, again, that fermented food is something that people believe that can help to have fuel and less harmful stuff coming your way. That will be fine. But what is harmful now is the fact that we do not know anymore what we put in our mouth. We don't go shopping. We live in a fast lane lifestyle. So for many of us, cooking means how much time this tray that I bought in the freezer section needs to be in this machine called microwave. What is in there? We have no clue. No clue. So rather than going to the extreme of the fermented, food and so on and so forth, my grandmother used to say, beside very special meals, a good meal can be made in 20 minutes. And I truly believe that. The meal takes 20 minutes, but it takes a lot of preparation to do the food shopping and so on and so forth. But if you organize yourself and you know what you put in your mouth, you give your machine the right stuff that has been built for. Oh my God, okay. And there was, you tell me when we need to stop. Okay, go ahead.
What about organics? Is that an improvement or not?
I do believe there is some element of truth, but there's also some scam in there. If I go to the food store, a healthy food store that is unnamed, okay, X food store, and I'd say, okay, organic broccoli, I can understand that. That means that this has been, grown in the right way, that they use, waste of animals to, to grow this stuff and so on, and that's fine. But when you start to say organic water, I think that is a scam. So I will not go for it, okay? All right, ma'am. And then in the back, because it's right to go in the back after that. Okay.
How can someone be tested to see if they have elevated zonulin levels, and how feasible is that?
Right now, you can do this only in a lab because there are very few kits out there available for research purpose only, but there are, kits that are coming out for commercial use shortly. That a gentleman in a blue shirt back there. And Ken, you need to tell me how long we're going for. This is now 7 o'clock.
They're twisting in the wind.
Huh? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, keep going, please. What do you think about putting our body into ketosis through our diet, and in particular, the esters that are being developed to put our body into ketosis quickly?
Well, again, once again, this kind of metabolic changes that you can give to your body can have different effect from one individual to another. So I think that, how can I put this in a, well, I'm trying to be unbiased here. We don't know enough, let's put it this way, that this will be a recipe that will be applicable to everybody. I will not dispute that this can be very useful for some of us, but once again, it needs to be customized. Keep in mind that Human Genome Project took a huge amount of time and money. Now, with $2,000, I know every single base pair in your body. And when this will come down to $500 or so, that will make this feasible. I think that, again, this will change dramatically our health care. Remember, our ancestor, the whole doctors, they were healers. Why? Because they took care of the patients. Then we learned about the basic of diseases, and we became evidence-based medicine, i.e. we studied the disease and not the individual, with the wrong assumptions that these diseases are homogeneous. These are final destinations. How you got there can be very different from one individual to another. Now we learned that, and we're going back to the origin, what we call personalized medicine. So that, I can really tailor on your needs a specific treatment for that disease. It can be very, very different for her that has the same disease but got there for a different destination, with a different path on their final destination.
One last question.
Way in the back.
Either at your institution or other institutions around the country, are you working in tandem with any neurologists or psychiatrists?
We have done a lot of work on the gut-brain axis. We have focused our efforts on the role of the microbiome in generating metabolic pathways that can affect behavior. Mainly, we've been studying schizophrenia and autism for two reasons. One, because the experts in the field, they had an open mind to work toward that kind of goal. And two, because these are the two conditions which we saw zonulin to go out of control. And we published, a fair number of papers. If you do a Medline search, you will find that on that topic. But I have to say that, again, we're scratching just the surface of what is in a very, very fascinating area. I can take an animal model of schizophrenia, take the poop of these animals, and transfect it to a germ-free animals and make that animal to behave as a schizophrenic animal. That as much as people are doing. Well, we can do this easily. But guess what? Animals, they eat their own poop. They do not talk. And they do not extrapolate completely what is going to be the human biology. So don't be so, wow. I can make a mouse fat by giving the poop of a fat mouse to a lean mouse. But once again, this all to say, if you simplify the system, this ecosystem that works in concert with us has a tremendous, consequences that we are not aware of. I'm telling you this because now this is also an ethical issue with this fecal transplantation that we are doing now in clinic with people that have specific conditions like, C. difficile, enterocolitis. Now there is an ethical, question. Who is the donor? What about if this guy is a convicted felon Am I going to make the recipient a convicted felon as well? We don't know. But it's fascinating, fascinating. And the only way to answer this question is indeed to have this multidisciplinary approach to see how eventually different expertise can work around something that, again, we start just now to appreciate. Well, folks, thank you so much for coming tonight.